join me for the third episode of Something Outside the Kitchen Windows Watching Me. I'm your host, Mystic, as always. I have been informed there is a fourth part to this little mini-series, this four-part series now, I suppose, so if there's enough interest in me reading the fourth portion of it, I would be happy to do so. I originally planned on only reading these three parts, but obviously upon searching for the story, I found the fourth part, and I was like, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right. But yeah, let me know if you want me to proceed in reading the fourth story. I'd be happy to do so. But without further ado, here is Something Outside the Kitchen Windows Watching Me, Part 3. What was I afraid of? I believe some part of me at that moment still held on to the thought that it was all in my head, that everything unfolding was just a figment of my imagination, albeit a viscerally real one. The only thing that kept me from the reality of the situation was truly asking for help, from seeking help. To seek help is to believe that something was wrong, that it was real, every minute detail. Hello? My train of thought had completely derailed when my gaze landed on a pair of grayish-blue eyes. Is Mr. Joubert here? I asked, as the girl standing before me was Cindy, Mr. Joubert's only child and daughter. She stood puzzled. I assumed my knocks unnerved her in some ways. The panic within my system was clouded by the feeling of bashfulness, standing before the brunette-haired girl. No, something wrong? I shook my head, letting out a quiet sigh. I wasn't sure what to do then. I still felt the need to tell someone about what I had just encountered earlier today, but to tell her? Someone who's practically a stranger to me as I was to her. We've never spoken, only occasionally saw each other once in a while around the hall. I never asked about her, nor did Mr. Joubert often talk to me about his daughter, almost as if it were an unspoken rule that she was completely off limits. I didn't have to know her or anything about her, and I had to respect that. She glanced at me with furrowed brows, seemingly analyzing my expression. Could she tell I was lying? It's just that I could have sworn I heard you call out for help. Did you need my dad's help with something? No, I'm sorry, I have to go. Apologies for bothering you. I was about to turn my heel until I felt stopped in my tracks as my wrist was pulled back, causing me to halt. Wait, you live beside 506, right? She asked, her eyes held a little more than concern. They held urgency. Glancing down at my wrist, I could see how she held me back from leaving, her hands held taut before pulling back with another apology. Yeah, 505, I mumbled before she glanced past me as I turned to see what her gaze was focused on. Feeling a slight unease in my nerves as my eyes landed on the two doors at the other side of the hall. You know what happened? Her eyes held a perplexed expression. I felt slightly unnerved by the way she looked at me, though I wasn't sure whether it was the fact that she was only a girl or simply the look of expression on her face. I'm sorry? What happened to the apartment? What happened to the apartment beside yours? She reiterated. I shook my head, once more unsure of what she was talking about. I had been naively oblivious to everything around me, more specifically around the apartment. It wasn't until recently that I started paying attention to my neighbors, and the other tenants, as I've kept myself locked in my own space for so long. If it wasn't for Mr. Joubert offering to help me move my couch inside, probably wouldn't have had the pleasure of knowing the man, even if he was my neighbor. Come in, she gestured, going inside the apartment to let me through the door. Sound of her footsteps disappearing into the living room as I closed it behind me. I've been doing some digging around this place for the past year, this building. This whole thing is practically being held together with duct tape and toothpicks. Huh? I don't understand. I stood confused as I watched her pick up a cardboard box. Toppling its contents onto the dining table nearby as a slurry of papers, news articles, and miscellaneous bags with labels were scattered on a wooden surface. I'm saying, something is going on right under your noses, she said as she handed me a printed page from a news article from 2001. A family of 7 dies in an apartment fire, I read out loud. I'm sorry, but what does this have to do with anything? What the hell are all of these? My words caught in my throat as my mind began to process what I said out loud. With a frantic motion, my gaze focused back onto the paper, reading the article intently, while Cindy stood with a slight annoyance in her expression, crossing her arms as the slight scowl slowly eased into understanding. Family of 7 dies in an apartment fire, December 28th, 2001, by Aiden K. In the early morning of December, a family of 7 tragically succumbed to an apartment fire in Richmond, Virginia. A flat of Crestview Commons was engulfed in flames caused by undetected gas leaks discovered during the investigation. Authorities uncovered the remains of the Gonzalezes. 2 adults and a 15-year-old boy was found. The remains of 4 Gonzalez children, 1 13-year-old girl, 2 children below the age of 10, and a toddler, could not be conclusively identified amidst the aftermath, but were ultimately presumed deceased. Residents reported hearing a loud explosion around 2:30 a.m., followed by flames rapidly spreading throughout the apartment complex not long after. Emergency responders arrived at the scene around 2:47 a.m., but fire had already consumed much of the apartment flat. Luckily, first responders were able to extinguish the flames before causing more damage by spreading further onto other flats. Despite their efforts, the family, 2 parents, 5 children, were unable to escape in time. At Elmwood, we take the safety and security of our residences very seriously. Our team of professionals take regular inspections with great caution for the comfort of our residents. We are heartbroken by the tragic loss of the Gonzalez family. We'll waive rent for all residents at the Crestview Commons this month as a gesture of solidarity. We send our love and condolences to the grieving families of the affected during this tough time. Samuel D., Elmwood Properties. Crestview's residents are left reeling, with many expressing concerns about the building's aging infrastructure and other issues with individual apartments. The management company, Elmwood Properties, declined any further statements in regard to questions about the building's maintenance. A memorial service for the Gonzalezes is being planned by family and friends with details forthcoming. This isn't possible. My voice fell hoarse, roughly admitting from my throat as I simmered further, taking in the development of information. The night I heard these voices, seeing the article with the photo attached with the crime scene photo of the burnt-out apartment from the outside made it feel all too real. Whatever skepticism I left chipped away entirely as my hands held historical evidence physically tangible within my grasp. They didn't even bother cleaning the fucking apartment even after all these years. This statement is complete bullshit. The agitation in my stammered words must have had Cindy confused, as her solemn expression contorted to furrowed confusion. What are you talking about? She asked. I mean, they haven't even cleaned out or renovated 506. I've been inside. I saw how disgusting and abandoned it was. You got in? A bewilderment etched onto her face as she walked closer with intent, seemingly wanting to hear more. I debated whether or not to tell her about what I saw, what I heard, and everything I've been experiencing the past weeks, but as I looked at the scattered items on the desk and the printed news article in my hand, I let out a deep sigh. I told her everything, starting from the beginning. Minor occurrences, from the dirty smudges on the floor, missing groceries, hearing footsteps that weren't my own. I laid it all out for this girl who was barely an acquaintance, and who I'm fairly certain doesn't even know my name. Despite everything, she was here, the only present body, who had an open ear to listen to me, who was ready to hear what I had to say, whether judgment was at the tip of her tongue or not. I felt weary, sharing more about the heavier occurrences. Her unease was evident when I recounted what I'd heard on the other side of the wall in my room, but I now realized to be the last moments of the Gonzalez family on the night of the fire. I also told her about my earlier visit to 506 and how I'd left a trail of dust in my wake as I fled the abandoned flat. Feeling the weight slightly eased the burden from my shoulders as I told her everything. Her eyes never showed any other emotion rather than curiosity and understanding, staying quiet the whole time as I spoke, a contrast to the reaction I anticipated. So I came here to talk to Mr. Jover, to your dad, about everything I just told you. He's the only person in this building who's been kind to me. He's the only person I can consider a friend in this fucked up place. You're pretty close to my dad, huh? Makes sense why you've been avoiding me like the plague when I would come to visit. She spoke, carrying a faint spark with her light quit. I felt a slight fluster creep up behind my back from her implication, but melting away as soon as her eyes gave to a distant look. He's been very protective of me ever since. Her words trailed along with her gaze, as it focused on the window nearby. Following its direction, I watched the parted curtains make way for the afternoon glow outside. my mom died. A heavy pause settled between us. The air had grown thick and awkward. Though it didn't last long, as she interrupted the silence with a sigh. It almost made the mistake of stumbling upon my own words inevitable, contemplating on responding right then and there if it wasn't for her. I'm sorry, I didn't mean the trauma dump, she spoke out abruptly. No, it's fine. I'm sorry for, well, your loss. For your loss, So close. She nodded before thanking me, brushing off the topic, avoiding the painful silence that threatened to frost over once more. We shifted the conversation to her findings, instances of previous tenants and residents leaving the building abruptly due to their apartments deeming unsafe. I know this all looks crazy. Brushing her hair back with her fingers, she looked around the messes she's caused at her dad's dining table. Growing up, I've seen what people in power would do to those that are weaker than them. My mom fought for the truth. She fought for the Gonzalez's family all those years ago. She knew Josephine, and they were even friends. My parents lived in this apartment for years. I told my father to move out years ago, especially after Mom had passed, but he just couldn't let go. Not of the apartment, but her. A sad sigh escaped her lips as she sank into a dining chair, avoiding my gaze. She seemed deep in thought, slightly and silently wrestling with emotions she hadn't fully processed. My investigation began when my friend Tessa started interning for Elmwood Properties headquarters, she continued, her tone shifting. She was stuck with filing and categorizing documents when she came across a whole binder of information about Crestview. I found it strange at first, but when she handed the binder to me, I even asked if it was safe, if she'd lose her job. And she said they probably wouldn't even notice it was missing since the binder was so outdated. I listened intently as she sifted through the papers and information she gathered, likely everything from the said binder. She pulled out a photograph of a woman. The picture was of a brunette woman with familiar grayish-blue eyes, features that bore an almost uncanny resemblance to the girl before me. Scrawled across the image in red ink were the words, Gonzalez, Case, Journalist. I have to know why they have this family photo of her and why they labeled her like a target, she said, her voice resolute. And I know the only way I can continue investigating is to know why and what my mom couldn't find out back then. To finish what she started. Her voice brimmed much determination, flipping the portrait back to her, staring at the image of her mother. She's the reason why I even chose investigative journalism. Her eyes held a longing sadness despite the chuckle in her tone. Her eyes stayed looking at the photo. I couldn't even utter a single word as my attention was fixated on her. I said, finish your story. I let her talk. Say everything she needed to, and did just as much information as I could. That's all I could do. That's all she needed from me. With silence inevitably permeating the room, the quiet was abruptly interrupted by a familiar jarring ring echoing around the apartment. My dad, he's home. Help me clean up. Her voice shifted to a frantic tremble, hastily piling the spilled contents of the box back into hiding. Wait, why are you hiding these things? Doesn't he know? The words died in my throat as the obvious began to weigh in my mind as she simply gave me a knowing look. Oh, right, he wouldn't let you. Okay. Stammering, I joined her in dumping the contents back into the box. After the second doorbell, we could hear the muffled voice of Mr. Jobbard behind the door. Cindy, are you home? He asked, pressing the doorbell once more. Just a minute, I'm changing, Cindy shouted out, running across the apartment with the box clutched within her hands as she wobbled to get up to her room. I had to improvise. With a bare-brained idea, I unlocked and opened the door. Hey, Mr. Jobbard, sorry, I was at the bathroom, stopped by to come and see you, didn't know you would be home, so I waited, I spoke, half-truthfully as the older man walked in observing the surroundings of his home. Where's Cindy? She's at her room. Our gaze led down the hall to the closed door. So what are you here for? He asked, walking to the living room as his eyes trailed to the dining table, nothing seemingly out of place. Well, I wanted to chill here for a bit while Mr. Grant was fixing up my apartment. You know the man talks and talks. I didn't want to be in my apartment to listen to him rant about the other tenants. He chuckled at my words, placing his wallet and keys onto a nearby stand before making his way to the kitchen. So you spoke to Cindy? I nodded, feeling slightly uncomfortable knowing the directions the question would lead from what he said. She's cool. I haven't really had the chance to speak or meet her properly, so it was nice to get properly acquainted, I spoke calmly. Despite the apple in my head, nervously feeling the target above me as his eyes felt pointed and sharper. Dad, you're back early. Cindy's voice permeated the tense atmosphere. She walked in casually with a poised nonchalance. She really had changed her clothing, knowing her dad would notice the lie if she was caught the same clothing she wore before he left. Slipping her phone back into her pocket, she stood by the kitchen archway. Yeah, I grabbed the wrong receipt to refund. I'll just do it tomorrow. There's 13 more days left anyways, he shrugged, letting out a relaxed sigh. Great, I actually have to go. I'm gonna run out on errands and hang with, Tessa, she spoke, pausing slightly, seemingly thinking of a name. She was lying, and the brief glance toward me to avoid her father's gaze as she told the lie. Okay, don't be out too late. Call me when something happens, alright? It didn't seem Mr. Jober caught on the lie, or trusted her enough that she'd be doing exactly what she said she was going to do. Cindy left, almost abruptly as silence once more permeated our apartment as I sat on the living room couch, pulling out my phone as I used Mr. Jobert's Wi-Fi. We spoke casually, and he asked me a few questions about how I was doing and how school was, and if I was still experiencing anything strange in my apartment. I didn't want to lie to him. I wanted to tell the truth, to tell him everything, just as I had told Cindy earlier. But if I was going to investigate and uncover what happened to the Gonzaleses alongside her, keeping Mr. Jobert in the dark as Cindy wanted it to be, would make things easier for her, for us both. I'm out. Your AC is all fixed up, kid. Don't call me again if something comes up. Text. My phone dinged a message notification as I read the text from Mr. Grant. I felt a slight ease in my chest knowing one of my problems was solved. Also the fact that I had a reason to slip away from Mr. Jobert's apartment without having to make him feel as if I was brushing him off or uncomfortable. Mr. Grant texted me saying the air conditioning in my apartment is fixed. Mind if I go and check it out? Just come by if you need me to. I tried my best to sound as casual as possible, but it didn't seem to matter as Mr. Jobert's eyes didn't leave the book he had prompted on his hands. It's fine. Make sure that Grant didn't half-ass the repairs, or else that thing would break again in less than a week. He spoke gruffly as I chuckled. His regular quips always did put a smile on my face, even if it was briefly, which made the guilt in my chest clench tighter. With a nod, I was out the door. The moment the dark oak wood made a thud echoing around the hall, I felt a pair of arms grab me, forcing me into the emergency exit nearby, practically adjacent to the apartment. I panicked, almost letting out a loud protest if it wasn't for the hand clasping on my mouth. Struggling, I felt my body being tugged. My head leaned in, I felt the hair being pulled into the stairwell. By the time I formed a coherent thought, the girl stood before me with her index finger against her lips, gesturing for me not to make a sound. Sorry, I had to make sure I wouldn't get spotted by my dad. She huffed, though she didn't really seem apologetic for almost giving me a heart attack. Was yanking my hair really necessary? I grumbled as she shrugged. You're bigger than me. I had to get you in here one way or another. Apologetic, her tone made me chuckle slightly. Before I could retort, she had already pulled out her phone, showing me a location in her map. This is Elmwood headquarters. It's not too far of a drive, she said, and I looked confused. We have to talk to Drover. I want to know more about what we're dealing with, even if I have to press for more answers, and even if it gets us in trouble. She had a look of determination once more, a reflection of the fact that she's been simmering in this investigation for a long time, unraveling each clue and information piece by piece for the past year or so. She was far more ready than I ever would be to face what was on the other side of it all, but I was still willing to make the jump if it meant uncovering the truth. It didn't take long for Cindy and me to reach the building. We used my car, driving around the city for half an hour until we arrived at our destination. The Elmwood headquarters loomed before us, a towering structure of glass and steel that reached up high to pierce the clouds above. Its sleek, modern design contrasted, sticking out like a sore thumb with the aging buildings surrounding its premises. At that moment, as we both stood out in the parking lot, the withered trees of winter made the already dreary atmosphere seem dead amidst the snow, resembling ashfall. At the heart of it all was Elmwood, its mega structure sucking the life out of its surroundings. The company logo, so saccharine and inviting, a mockery of what we presumed lay within its corporate walls. I didn't know what to expect. Cindy didn't seem to either, but we pushed through those revolving doors with puffed chests, bracing ourselves for what's to come. Truthfully, I wasn't even sure if we'd make it as far as the waiting area outside Drover's office. Yet, with Cindy at my side, we found ourselves standing in the middle of a dreary, minimalistic atmosphere. The room exuded an oppressive sterility, void of any color other than modern black, polished white, and formal gray. At the far end, the woman behind the desk dabbled away on her desk keyboard, her fingers racing past each key with precision, not bothering to spare a glance, knowing exactly what our presence meant in that waiting room. You can't go in without an appointment. Mr. Drover isn't seeing anyone right now. The secretary behind the desk spoke, her blonde hair neatly prompted up in a bun, not bothering to spare a glance at us both, with her eyes tired and empty from behind the sharp frames of her glasses. Cindy huffed, shaking her head. I'm not leaving until we see him, is that clear? Trepidation in her voice is evident as the secretary reeled back on her seat, taken aback by her tone. I'll see what I can do, but for now, please, sit. The secretary's murmured voice permeated our ears. Her words brought Cindy a sense of ease, compliant for now as she turned to take a seat at the back of the black plush leather couches nearby. As Cindy settled on the couch, my eyes averted to where she had stood earlier. A photo etched into the brochure displayed in the desk was Mayor Kingsley. His face was familiar, and practically hard to forget due to his campaign posters being plastered around town at every election season. Even if the man has been mayor since the Trilobites, beside him stood a younger Samuel as the pair stood together with their hands clasped together in unity. Trust the flow, build the future with Elmwood. We sat in silence for what felt like forever, as Cindy kept her piercing glare on the grand oak wood floor, a few feet away from the secretary's desk, as the lady behind the counter continued to take calls. The words I overheard from where I sat sounded like typical business jargon. How long are we going to stay here? I asked. As long as it takes, Cindy grumbled. I could tell. She, too, was beginning to get impatient. We both knew they were planning to ice us out until we decided to leave. Mr. Drover is busy today, so the wait might be longer. If you could just come back another day and... The secretary spoke out, her voice sounding even more worn down compared to earlier. Oh no, we can wait, Cindy interrupted. The blonde lady sighed. Okay, she spoke defeatedly, returning her attention to her work as the oddly calming sound of her nails tapping on the keyboard, accompanied by the keys typing at a certain pace and rhythm, put me in a light trance. About 2 hours had passed, and Cindy stayed unmoving in her seat, gaze drifting from one place to another as her arms crossed, with her back against the couch cushion. At some point she closed her eyes, seemingly resting as her gentle breaths were slightly audible. Sir, these kids won't leave without speaking to you. The secretary paused before her eyes trailed to where Cindy and I were at. What are your names? She asked. We briefly introduced our names, before a long pause permeated the reception area after she repeated our names on the other line of the phone. Cindy and I looked at the woman behind the counter as her face contorted to a solemn expression. Nodding with the occasional hums of acknowledgement, she would turn her gaze towards me and Cindy before briefly looking down at her desk. Understood, sir, she spoke before typing briefly as she brought the phone back down. Are they going to let us in? I asked, while Cindy keeping her eyes directly on the woman who stayed silent, her brows furrowed before standing up. Before Cindy could even speak, the double doors at the far end of the area opened at an abrupt pace. The door slammed wide, and 3 guards dressed in black suits stepped into the room, immediately making their way towards me and Cindy. Their polished shoes took long strides, dragging deliberately across the floor as their distance grew closer. Mr. Drover won't be seeing you today, the blonde woman spoke. We're not leaving until... Cindy defiantly tried to stand her ground when the guards began to escort us both out of the room. Ma'am, it'll be easier for us all if you cooperate. The guard tried to step towards her, but she resisted, and seeing the girl struggle, I had to step in. Hey, don't put your hands on her, I spoke out, trying to drown out the hint of nervousness I held in my throat. Before I could react, both guards held onto me as the one restrained Cindy. We both struggled to get out of their grasp as I shook myself trying to free my arms loose, while the three had me and Cindy on hold, being forcibly escorted out of the building. Throughout the process of being escorted out, at some point, Cindy and I stopped resisting as we got to the lobby before being ultimately shoved outside into the cold winter air. At that moment, as I sat on the snow-covered pavement, watching my breath in front of my eyes, I looked up at the girl with an apologetic look, wishing we could have done more in coming here. I also held a worried look with Mr. Joker in mind, how I'd let his daughter be manhandled in front of me? Man would kill me if he knew. The drive back was quiet. Cindy had her elbow propped up against the window of the passenger seat as I focused on driving on the dimly lit road. I have a Go Fruit bar in my bag if you're hungry. I broke the silence, keeping my eyes on the road. She turned her attention towards me. I felt her piercing gaze, like a weight on my chest, as I could see her expression from my peripheral view. With her mouth slightly parted, "Do you have water?" she asked as I nodded. She took my bag from the back seat, rummaging through my stuff before pulling out an unopened bottle of water through. With a drink in her hand, an expression furrowed as her eyes saw something amidst the clutter. "Is this?" Her hands dug through the bag once more before pulling out the brochure. The saccharine image of it gave off was hard to ignore, even from a brief peripheral glance. "Oh, that's the brochure I found earlier in the waiting room, where that secretary lady sat," I spoke, continuing to drive as she examined the image on the brochure. "This looks outdated. I remember seeing a photo like this at home, too, when my mom was still in the case. It was pinned on an investigation board in her office before her evidence got taken away, that is." I was about to speak, but she cut me off before I could utter a word. "Can I keep this?" She perked up, gesturing at the brochure. Yeah, I'm not sure what you would need it for, though," I replied, briefly glancing at her before turning my eyes back onto the road. I feel like I'm finally getting closer to finding out what my mom knew. With silence settling in, it felt comfortable this time. I could see it in her face, her once solemn expression tinged with melancholy, now held a sliver of hope. I gave her a curt smile as she nodded, slipping the brochure into her bag. Despite it all, I could sense that the closer we were to finding the truth, the more uncertain I was whether I or even Cindy was prepared to uncover what had been buried from the world decades ago. What did her mother find out amidst the chaos, hidden between the veil of deceit of Elmwood had placed so carefully over the public? Their misdeeds, their shortcomings? Wasn't sure I was ready for it. "Are you prepared to know the truth?" I asked curiously. "No, I never will be." Reluctantly, I returned to my apartment that night, still in the same state as I left it that morning, with everything that had progressed throughout the day. I had completely forgotten that Ryan had stopped to fix the air conditioning. I stood looking at the dirty smudge across the vents, making note to clean and paint over the ever-so-charming remnants of that fading mold. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief, finally feeling the weight off my shoulders from dealing with an air conditioning problem that had lasted for almost a whole month at this point. I haven't had company in forever, too, so it felt right on time that my air conditioning was all fixed up. "Please excuse me. My apartment," I spoke, walking towards the girl, with her laptop prompted on the kitchen counter. "It's fine," she replied absent-mindedly, typing away on her computer. A short pause lingered before Cindy broke the silence. "Look." Turning her laptop toward me, she gestured at the screen showing the contents of what she'd been fixated on for the past 10 minutes. With squinted eyes, I peered over to see a news article from the year 2000. Elmwood Properties partners with cities to launch affordable housing initiative for underserved communities. I read out loud as the photo below was the very image imprinted on the brochure I took from the secretary's desk. Except this time the background was no longer edited out. Taken from the mayor's office, the pair had their hands clasped in the shake for the cameras to capture. Before I could continue to read further, Cindy turned the laptop back towards herself. That article outlines how they struck some deal to bring in affordable housing for the underprivileged. Elmwood financed the builds and the mayor authorized the zoning regulations. On paper, it looks good. Great, even, but if you look closer, She scrolled down the page, pausing to let me glimpse at another photo embedded in the article. Elmwood's model home, surrounded by smiling people, families with happy and healthy grins, and children being held by their parents. A picture-perfect image of what Elmwood wanted the public to see, of what they wanted to portray. They funneled taxpayer money into the project, jacked up rank prices the next year, and pushed out all the people who couldn't pay anymore. Cindy muttered bitterly, folding her arms. Bottom line is, it's pretty clear Elmwood and the mayor go way back. She spoke, glancing back at the screen once more with a piercing stare. Samuel was their poster boy in the 2000s, it seems. Most of the articles about Elmwood back then had his face all over. Cindy scrolled up and typed once more as I stood from behind her, getting a better look at the previous articles she had propped up. Can you search for more articles or news blogs about the family's case? I asked. She sighed, shrugging as she clicked off of a page. There's little to none. I've tried months ago. Feels like a dead end. Cindy sounded defeated. I felt bad for even asking, as it would make sense she would have tried that long ago, especially when the case was still new to her. With my eyes fixed on the words, "no results found," I felt my brows furrow as my gaze focused on the blank screen. May I asked, gesturing for permission to use the laptop briefly. She hummed, nodding, moving to the side to give me access to the computer. Thank you. Immediately, I began pulling up an archival tool website, which retrieves older versions of web pages taken and archived throughout time, trying to see if articles or pages got taken out at some point in time. As soon as I clicked on the year 2002, there were more relevant searches written in December 2001. The hell? Good thinking, Cindy clicked as I chuckled, thanking her. Scrolling through the browser, Cindy clicked her tongue. Of course, those pricks would try to hide articles that put Elmwood in a bad light. She grumbled while I read in my mind the article headlines detailed on the page. And the majority of them already said what we knew, or at least what the public was told back then, that a family had died in an accidental apartment fire caused by an undetected gas leak. I sighed with furrowed brows as I scrolled through it, not finding anything substantial to give us more. I felt a sense of hopelessness. Did people truly care so little about this case to not look further into what truly had happened? Not even a moment thought to read between the lines of a story so conveniently cut and dry, so painfully clean. If the speculation was proven to be the truth, would the public even care for so long? Or would they move on, leaving the affected families to pick up the pieces of what was left? It was all so unfair, utterly, devastatingly unfair. Wait, stop, Cindy interrupted. What? Her finger pointed to a link on a video. Sister of Elmwood Fire pleas for justice, as it read, as my hand practically jolted to click, immediately opening the window, prompting it to come up on the following screen. A woman in her late 20s prompted the camera to her face, standing outside what seemed to be a parking lot, along with a group of individuals all aligned with posters and signs. Written within the signs were, "Justice for the deceased, we know the truth, and stop the lies." Those were the ones visible in the video, but it's pretty obvious there were more signs, as people at the back held up theirs before the camera shifted its focus back onto the young woman. "My name is Tina. I am the sister of the late Josephine," she spoke with a look of determination in her eyes, though tiredness was evident. I felt a chill down my spine as she spoke with a rasping animosity in her voice. My sister, along with her family, was killed in the fire. I have no doubts about that. Today I, along with family and friends of the deceased, are gathered to protest outside of Elmwood headquarters to voice out the truth. The camera panned around, showing the groups of people in protest in the familiar towering building Cindy and I found ourselves at not too long ago. Though with the renovations current and the present, it looked just as dreadful as it did 20 years ago. They know the truth. I know the truth, and I'm sure as hell Elmwood knows it too. It's time the public finds out as well what really happened to my sister. She paused, glancing away from the camera as her expression turned from determination to anger. "You won't get away with this. Stop trying to hide the truth and bring justice to the victims," a voice yelled out from the background of the video, as Josephine began to shout out with the same sentiments of the crowd. their signs being held up higher than before. It didn't take long until a group of guards, accompanied by law enforcement, tried to tame the rioting crowd. Cindy looked visibly uncomfortable as her eyes were glued to the screen of the computer. "We need you to leave," an authoritative voice spoke from outside the frame, while Cindy and I were left to look at Tina's expressions, yelling at the security guard with a repeated mantra. "We know the truth! We know the truth!" The repeated chant by the crowd echoed around the property, raising their signs in a blurred, uniform motion. "This is private property. You will be arrested for trespassing," another voice said in the background, carrying the same zealous moral conviction. "We're not leaving until—" Tina's voice cut off. The camera's shaky visual was barely discernible before ultimately lying flat on the floor. Tina was being dragged away, along with her fellow protesters, as the policemen held out the protesting group, relentless with their words as their voices slowly died out and faded into the background. The video was nearing its end, until the camera was visibly picked up by a manicured hand blocking its lens, before ultimately cutting to black. So, thank you for sticking with me through the 3 parts of Something Outside the Kitchen Windows watching me. This is a weird one, I will say. It's not what I was expecting, and it's probably not what y'all were expecting either, but I appreciate you guys sticking with us. I'm really happy with the channel's growth so far. Like I said, if you want me to read part 4, I'm more than happy to do so. I just got a new mic last week, so that's pretty dope. I'm excited to actually sound more like a human, less like a robot. If you know, you know. But, yeah, Kaylee should be uploading later today, and I will probably be uploading later today, so double whammy for y'all, so yeah, you're welcome. Stick around for next time. I will be reading something different after part 4. If part 5 doesn't come out by then, obviously if that's the case, I'll reconsider. But this has been great, and thanks for sticking with me. So, until next time, stay spooky, and we'll catch you later.